Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first episode of the Green Shift podcast. With me, I am Salman Hadi. And in this journey, we are going to know and learn a lot about geoscience in relation to just transition, sustainable development, and net zero. So it's almost a new way of seeing geoscience. Let me welcome our first guest in this podcast series, Professor Mike Stevenson. Where today we are going to learn more about more about energy geoscience and its application, and how we as a geoscientist have a crucial role to play in achieving net zero. So, hello, Professor Mike, for being here. Actually, your profile is one of the inspiring profile that give me the strength to learn more and to get into different areas. So, you as a geoscientist, you're currently now working for different universities, and also you are a consulting for geoscience for Stephen Geoscience Group, and you are a vice chair in in Permian Subcommission. So all these things are quite wonderful and quite diverse. So we would love to know more about your journey. So you can just let's get back since that you are graduated, how you get there.
Ah,
Yeah.
well, thanks, Salma, for this great opportunity to talk on this great podcast, which is a really good idea, I think. And you ask about my past. Well, it's quite long. I've reached a great age, and the things I've done are quite varied, really, for a geologist. So, I was a teacher for a long time. I did a degree at Imperial College in geoscience. But then I switched to being a school teacher. So I was a school teacher for many years in Africa, south of the Sahara, in Botswana. So I was a teacher for about 8 or 9 years, which was very interesting. So I learned a little bit about the global south, a little bit about developing countries and their needs, So also about poverty, about poor people. So it was interesting to start like that. But I worked also as a stratigrapher, a research scientist, as a paleontologist. But then I moved into where I was working in the British Geological Survey. I worked into kind of national needs for geology. What does a country need out of geology? What does it need from its geologists and policy, for example? And probably the last 10 years, I've worked quite a lot on energy transition. So things like carbon capture and storage. I did a lot of work on that, on geothermal. Um, Also, I got a lot of money for organizations to work to build test sites. So I was able to get some money from the UK government, about 30 million pounds, to build a site to test geothermal, how it might work. So I have a lot of kind of experience in what practically you can use geology for. So getting resources, making an energy transition, but also I have a good experience of the developing world and of governance and policy and these kinds of things. So for me, it's kind of natural to talk about the energy transition, but also to realize, that we have a certain kind of energy system at the moment, which won't be so easy to change from.
Oh, okay. You end up with like energy system, yeah, because we are in the global south, and I am particularly one of the student who studied geoscience in one of the global south university. I can see that the absence of the whole energy system together in relation to geoscience. So you will
Hmm.
find like something like petroleum geoscience or mineral, but you will not find that wider scope and getting students get prepared from the early stages and get involved into such things. So today I will be happy to discuss with you, like it's really new concept to know about, and as a geoscientist, I feel it's like really fulfilling to know about, and I would love to learn more about it. It's energy geoscience. So what is the difference between energy geoscience and petroleum geoscience? So just elaborate on this point.
Yeah, great question. Great question. A lot of geologists are wondering that very question, but there's not a lot of difference actually. It's really about what you use your skills for and the kind of organization you work for. So, for example, for a petroleum geoscientist, you're working with seismic, you're working with wells, you're working with geophysical logs, you're working with core and cuttings and other people to develop models of what, or an understanding of what the rocks look like underneath the ground for getting more oil and gas out of the ground. But in energy geoscience or in energy geoscience transition work, you might be thinking, instead of understanding the reservoir for oil and gas, you'd be thinking about understanding the reservoir for carbon dioxide storage or disposal in CCS. Or you might be thinking about the rocks, whether they are capable of holding heat, for heat storage. Or you might be thinking of the rocks being able to store hydrogen, for hydrogen as a kind of battery in itself for storing large amounts of energy. So it's not a big difference, because most of the skills that you have as a geologist, particularly in petroleum, can be easily kind of adapted for use in the energy transition. And the main things are, as I say, carbon capture and storage, geothermal, heat storage, even things like cool. So, in Middle Eastern countries, for example, it could be that in the future, the subsurface is used as a source for cool temperatures for air conditioning. So lots of geological skills that you learn as a student in a university in the global south, whether you're in Khartoum or in Uganda or in Nigeria, the kinds of things you're learning can be put to use in the energy transition just as much as they can in petroleum. So I don't think it's a big change. It's just maybe a change in attitude, maybe a change in the companies and organizations that you work for. I mean, unless those companies are moving towards the energy transition, then it's hard for you to get work in that kind of area. But they are moving. Most oil and gas companies are moving in towards the energy transition. They're thinking about CCS. They're thinking about geothermal, which means it's good for students like yourself and others coming out of university, because you have the opportunity to start using your geology skills in this new area.
Yeah, so that might be one of the things to be highlighted, that you, as a geoscientist, there will be a need for your geoscience background to be utilized in order to have a less concerned carbon future. So that's really an important point to be highlighted. Another thing that I was asking about is the transformative skills that the geoscience can possess. So as a geoscience, maybe like there is like a direct application to the geoscience in subsurface modeling, but also you as a geoscience, you will gain transformative skills. I think that your brain probably can work in finance or can work, I don't know how to say that, but there is a skills that can be transferred into another sector. So just share with us some thought about that as you've been there.
Yeah, I mean, look, my skill, my core skill is actually in paleontology and palynology. So I was a geologist who learned about fossil pollen and spores, which may sound extremely esoteric and unusual, but it has a very practical use. So for me, I can tell you if rocks are Permian or Carboniferous, but simply by looking at a microscope slide, which is very useful for people who are drilling holes to understand where they are in the stratigraphy. So um, those sorts of skills that I've developed are very, very useful in this new energy transition. So, for example, we are interested in carbon capture and storage. We're interested in where you can put carbon dioxide in the rocks. And one of the things about reservoirs of carbon dioxide is, or reservoirs that might be suitable for carbon dioxide, is they contain heterogeneity, so small mudstone layers. And at the moment, I'm developing a method to distinguish between mudstone layers which are baffles to fluid flow and those which are very thin and don't cause problems for fluid flow. So in the old days, you would use that for people who are interested in oil and gas to understand where the oil is moving. But now we can use those sorts of skills to understand how carbon dioxide might move inside the reservoir. So you can transfer these skills. The other thing is because we geologists know about the rocks. Not many people do know this. In government, for example, our skills are useful when we talk to policymakers and to people involved in making decisions. So we can, talk to government ministers or people in government and say, well, look, have you thought about trying carbon dioxide storage, or have you thought of hydrogen storage in this place or that place? So we have to learn to be able to speak the language of the policymaker and the people who make the decisions, because otherwise, our good ideas won't be acted on. So when you say being able to transfer our skills, it's about being able to communicate, and it doesn't mean necessarily in English, in any language where you're operating, you need to be able to communicate in words and in the diagrams you use, the PowerPoints, and all these things you learn as a geologist will be very useful in the energy transition, because as you grow up, youthful people like you, not me, are the ones that are going to do this change. We start it, but the younger geologists are the ones who are going to make it happen. So I think, you need to learn how to communicate, and you are. I mean, that's the great thing about this. So keep communicating, keep talking to people who make decisions, and then the world will be a better place.
Okay, that's really wonderful. Actually, what you've been mentioned, that geoscience for national, for like for serve of a nation. Let's make it clear. That's really what need to be done. For example, in the global south. And while you were talking, I was thinking about the application of geoscience, because we already, for example, in the global south, particularly Sudan, where I am from, like there is like a Nubian shield or all these things where they are. I tend to read, as you mentioned in the your chapter that you wrote in one of your books. It's a very potential, but because there is no that channel for communication, always like it's become very vivid for energy transition. We are the youth supposed to do something. So through your speech, you're emphasizing that. So I find that really incredible. Yeah.
Mm.
Thanks for these points. Yeah. Also, another thing that I wanted to discuss with you is that minerals, because I'm talking, or I'm reflecting my own, let me say, my own experience. So when we were at university, that is like those who are petroleum geoscientists, or that is those who are studying minerals. So for example, if you are a petroleum geoscientist, you feel like you've got nothing to do with minerals. So you always
Mm.
have that separation
Mm.
between the different disciplines of geology or geoscience. So tell us more about the role of the minerals and how you shouldn't just get restricted into what you've been doing during the university. Almost all geoscience are connected, and you can uh, get uh, get to do the things done. What need to be done, you've got to learn to solve that
Mm.
problem. So
Mm.
tell us about the role of minerals and how you can achieving transition.
Yeah, great question. And I know many geologists who began as sedimentologists or petroleum geologists who switched to minerals. It's not impossible to do this. Again, your skills in numerical skills in analysis of rock types, these are things that you can adapt to other kinds of disciplines in geology. So you don't have to get stuck in petroleum. You can move into minerals. It happens all the time. But your question is really important because the energy transition, in many ways, for geology, means starting to think about different sorts of minerals to mine. So these are sometimes called critical minerals or critical raw materials or critical metals. So I was in Southern Africa a month ago in Windhoek at the Colloquium for African Geology, a really big African conference. And all the talk was really about where are we going to get lithium from for all our batteries for cars? Where are we going to get cobalt? Where are we going to get nickel? And it was really, really intense. And many African countries have a lot of these metals and minerals, which are really important for the energy transition. And, they want to be able to benefit from their metals and minerals. They don't want to end up in the old colonial ways where basically Africa supplied metals and minerals to the rich north, and those rich countries essentially industrialized and got rich on the basis of these. Now, quite rightly, African countries, global south countries, want to benefit from these metals and these critical materials that are so important to the energy transition. So, having a strong geology in those areas, whether that's in petroleum kind of skills like that you might adapt for CCS or geothermal, or mineral skills, is really important. Having those skills in the students, in the universities, and in the institutions as well. It's really important that the geological surveys, the government departments, the government themselves understand the value of the material they're sitting on. And, they're beginning to understand this, and they want to be able to be free to trade with the European Union or the United States or China or other Asian countries and get the best out of their resources, be able to not only sell those resources, but use them in their own countries. So have battery factories in sub-Saharan Africa. Don't just send the materials to Europe for them to build battery factories. Build them in Africa, so that Africa can really benefit. So I think, again, geological people like you and me, African scientists, African geologists who are coming out of university, you're the ones who are going to help make this happen. You're the ones who are going to help make, Africa wealthy from its materials, to make sure that it benefits properly, and that, it's not caught in these kind of old-fashioned colonial relationships. So I think governance is really important. How this happens, but it couldn't be more important. Geology at this point. The geologists who are growing up in Namibia, in South Africa, in Botswana, in Zambia, in Nigeria, these are the ones that are going to help African countries benefit from these special materials that they have. So it could not be more important.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I was thinking about to ask you to send a message for the youth in the global south, and I think you've already covered that. Um, yeah,
Get working on
yeah,
your stuff.
yeah. So I think that what you've been mentioned is, yeah, we as a young geoscientists should push this forward.
Mm,
So yeah, I was thinking like as a geoscientist, for example, those who work in conventional extraction. Maybe like there is a developing markets. It's the green job markets. So for example, CCS will be flourished, geothermal will be flourished to achieve the net zero goals and all these things, the minerals. And so, is there any order? So, can we say that it's the market's going to be will need more of those who will work on CCS or those who will work on
Mm,
geothermal or those if there is any kind of order to these things so the people can think like what is a more potential area so they
mm,
can get concentrated or just can get involved in crafting their abilities into that direction.
mm.
Yeah.
Another great question, and I guess you're asking me to predict the future,
Yeah. Kind of.
which is not easy. But in,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
my in my opinion, um, you know, I wouldn't worry if you're a young geologist too much about specializing too early. The main thing is to make sure you're good in the numerical aspects of geology, geophysics, uh, sort of description, that kind of thing. Being able to do the sort of core geological things makes you quite adaptable. But I think the major things are metals. Depending on where you are, if you're in a country with strong critical metal resources, then clearly there will be companies there, there will be institutions like geological surveys, there will be consultancies, there will be government departments who want to develop them. So there will be a need for geologists of that type. But if your country is embarking on development of, let's say, lots of gas fields. So in Southeast Asia, for example, they have very high CO2 gas fields. In order to develop those gas fields, they'll need to probably develop CCS. So being a geologist who specializes in CCS may be a really good option. So I think at the moment, the two main areas probably are CCS and critical metals if you're a young geologist. But other areas like geothermal are very important. Again, it depends what kind of country you're in. So, in countries in East Africa, for example, where you have the East African Rift Valley, you have very high geothermal potential. And in places like Kenya, they're already developing this really well. They have really good expertise, geoscience expertise already. But in the future, there will be more. So, again, if you are a young geologist, you might think, well, I'll specialize a bit in geothermal here. So it's a bit difficult to predict where the main opportunities would be, but those are the three areas I think. But generally, I wouldn't worry too much if you're a young geologist, because the things you're learning in university or in your first job are the sorts of things that would be great to develop in all those three areas I mentioned.
Okay. So yeah, that's really wonderful. Yeah, I just have a question because of the time. Because of the time, actually, because of the time of the episode and because of the right time, why a cope will be around almost like yeah 1 month or less than 1 month, and one of the main agenda is to achieve the net zero or transition. So I just want to know like that kind of skills like communicating like you mentioned that geoscience have to push all these things uh, to push this dialogue go forward. um, do you think that just like can you tell us a bit more about the role of geoscience in these kind of dialogue since you've already been I think one of the IPCC
Hmm,
you've worked with them like that
hmm,
uh, panel for climate change, I guess.
hmm,
You've been work with them,
hmm.
right?
Yeah, so look, COP28 is very important. It's important because it's being held in the Middle East, and Middle East is a place where we already have very high temperatures, and temperatures which are reaching levels which are very, very difficult for people. And by 2070, in 50 years or so, there are predictions that these wet bulb temperatures, these temperatures which relate humidity and temperature together, will be very, very high, above 35 degrees. So really quite difficult. So that's a good reason for COP to be there, because this is an area where this is a group of countries which could suffer from really severe kind of temperature, humidity problems. But secondly, because in many ways the Middle East is the home of oil and gas. It's where enormous amounts of oil are being produced. Saudi Arabia produces something like 10 million barrels of oil a day, and it's a place where um, there's going to be a change. These big companies, these big organizations will change. They're already changing. They're already thinking about CCS, for example, and these sorts of things. So it's really good to have it in the Middle East, and because it will focus minds in that area on what has to be done. I mean, most people agree, most forecasters agree that fossil fuels will be needed a bit longer. There's no real doubt about that. So being more efficient about producing them is important. Being using less fuel in producing them is really important. But also getting the main, the countries which have relied so much on oil and gas to think slightly differently, which they are doing, of course. I mean, it's kind of well known, but to continue doing that and to lead the world, because some areas of the world are still not really considering the problem of climate change. So
Yeah.
to get to your point about COP28, people need to be there. Geologists need to be there. Otherwise, they won't listen to us. So we need to keep speaking about these things, about climate change, about how geoscience can help in the energy transition.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. I think that's what Saudi Arabia have been doing. They currently applying something called circular carbon economy, and that's I find really interesting. And that's why I say like for you as a geoscientist, because I'm like as the podcast name tells that I am pushing the green shift. So I'm saying like I don't mind to work in one of the oil company, but might I work for sustainability section?
Mm,
Sustainability or how like to or CCS section. So as a geoscience, if you have that tendency to to the green shift, or you feel like you want to do like some climate friendly activities, so you can enter the oil sector, but you can think of areas like there is a specific section called like sustainability section in the oil and gas sector, and there is CCS project as you've mentioned. So probably you can make the oil and gas more cleaner. Yeah,
mm,
although many people said there is no clean.
mm,
Fossil fuel should be like we
mm,
should phase it out as soon as we can. And
mm,
I think I do really have a lot of things to discuss with you, and the conversation is really wonderful. So, but we've come to the end of our episode, and hopefully we can have another one if that's possible. So, I'm happy to talk to you. Just say any final words or any comments or any point you would love to share with the young
mm,
geoscientists or with the youth. And
mm.
so the stage is yours again.
Yeah, very, very, very quickly. Yeah, as I've been saying all along, the global south is really important, because that's where all the demand is. That's where people are. That's where energy demand will increase. That's where people are increasing. So that's really important. And the young geoscientists in the global south are really important, because they're the ones who are going to help us do this energy transition. So for me, just keep going in your geoscience if you're a geoscientist, and try and get the work that you can to work in the energy transition. And as you said before, lots of oil and gas companies are transitioning anyway, so you can get this kind of work inside these companies. So I think it's really important, and it's a really exciting world that young geologists and geoscientists are now working in.
Yeah, thinking of geoscience and energy transition, yeah, and accelerate that. So I think it's been a really wonderful conversation, and thank you for your time. Yeah, and I really I think at the end of the episode I should say thank you, because you're the one like pushed me out to to start this podcast. So I would love to share that with my audience, and and that's it. So bye bye, and see you in another episode where we will learn more about geoscience and different ongoing projects. And yeah, that's it. Bye.
Right.